All rise. Oyez, oyez, oyez. The judges of the United States District Court for the District of Connecticut sitting in ceremonial session. The Honorable Alvin W. Thompson, Chief Judge, presiding. All persons having business before this session of the United States District Court for the District of Connecticut draw near. Give your attention and ye shall be heard. God save the United States of America and this honorable court.
Please be seated. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This afternoon, we convene a ceremonial session of the United States District Court for the District of Connecticut on the occasion of the unveiling of a portrait of Judge José A. Cabranes. Judge Cabranes was a judge of this court from December 1979 to August 1994, when he was appointed a United States Circuit Judge for the Second Circuit. He is a former Chief Judge of this court. It is my pleasure to welcome you all on this wonderful occasion on behalf of my colleagues, and I would like to introduce my colleagues who are present. To my far right is District Judge Vanessa L. Bryant, and then District Judges Stephen R. Underhill and Robert N. Shotney, and then Senior District Judge Warren W. Edgington. To my immediate left is Senior District Judge Dominic J. Squartrito, and then District Judges Christopher F. Droney and Mark R. Kravitz. We are pleased to welcome today a number of present and past public officials. We welcome the United States Attorney for the District of Connecticut, David B. Fine. We also welcome the former Attorney General of the United States, Judge Michael B. Mukasey, and the former Associate Attorney General of the United States, as well as former United States Attorney for Connecticut, Kevin J. O'Connor, and former United States Attorney for the District of Connecticut, Stanley A. Twardy. Other judicial officers of the District of Connecticut are with us today. Retired United States District Judge Alan H. Nevis. United States Magistrate Judges Joan G. Margolis, Donna F. Martinez, and Holly B. Fitzsimmons. From the United States Bankruptcy Court, Chief Judge Lorraine M. Weil, Judge Albert S. Dabrowski, and Judge Alan H. W. Schiff. In addition, we are pleased to note the presence of Senior Judge Tucker L. Melancon of the Western District of Louisiana, who regularly sits as a visiting judge in this district. We welcome also from the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, Judge John M. Walker, Jr., Judge Barrington D. Parker, Jr., Judge Rena Raji, Judge Deborah A. Livingston, and Judge Raymond J. Loyer, Jr. Two judges of that court, Judge John O. Newman and Judge Ralph K. Winter, will speak during our program. In addition, we welcome Senior Judge Edward R. Corman of the Eastern District of New York. We also welcome from the Connecticut Appellate Court, Judge Carmen E. Espinoza. From the Connecticut Superior Court, Judge Antonio C. Robina. From the New York State Supreme Court, Justice Francois A. Rivera. And from the New York State Appellate Division, First Department, Judge Eugene L. Nardelli. We welcome, too, the President of Yale University, Richard C. Levin. Also, we welcome the former President of the Hispanic National Bar Association and Chairman Emeritus of the Board of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, Carlos A. Ortiz. Mr. Ortiz is the General Counsel of Goya Foods, Inc. Finally, I wish to extend a very warm welcome to the judges' family members who are present here today. We have with us Judge Cabranes' wife, Professor Kate Stith Cabranes, his daughter, Jennifer C. Braceras, and her husband, Roberto Braceras, his son, Alejo Cabranes, his aunt, Ida Triforis, and her daughter, Katina Triforis, and his cousins, Jaime and Mary Lopez. An especially warm welcome to you. Our Master of Ceremonies today is one of Judge Cabranes' former law clerks, José Furman. He has been the leader of the Law Clerks Project to commission the portrait of Judge Cabranes. Mr. Furman is a career federal prosecutor who clerked also for Judge Michael Mukasey in the Southern District of New York and for Justice David Souter. Since his clerkship on the Supreme Court, he has been an Assistant United States Attorney in the Southern District of New York, with notable experience in terrorism prosecutions. He served for 2 years as counselor to the Attorney General of the United States and is now the Deputy Chief of the Appeals Unit in the Southern District. Mr. Furman.
Thank you, Judge Thompson, for that overly kind introduction, and may it please the court. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you here on behalf of all of Judge Cabranes' law clerks. We organized this event and commissioned the portrait that you will see shortly as a tribute to Judge Cabranes' 30 remarkable years on the bench. Although, just for the record, it's 31 and a half or so and counting. That said, I can't think of any more fitting tribute to the judge's service than your presence here today, and I thank you for that. I want to make one thing clear at the outset. In commissioning this portrait, the judge's law clerks do not mean to suggest that he is in any way, shall we say, on the wane. Far from it. As anyone who knows the judge or has seen him recently knows, he's as active as he ever was, and I expect he will remain that way. We simply decided that it was an appropriate time to express our appreciation, our affection, and our admiration for a tremendous public servant, a mentor, and a friend. And speaking personally, Judge, I can tell you that I feel truly blessed to count you as one of my friends and my mentor. And put simply, without you, I would not be half the lawyer or the person I am today. So the point of that is you should not consider this or view it as any sort of retirement party. Instead, and perhaps mindful of the fact that Judge Cabranes knows more Yiddish than my grandparents ever did, you should look at it as a bar mitzvah. So, Mazel Tov, Judge. And before I turn the podium over to the first of our speakers, I just want to acknowledge and say thank you on behalf of all the law clerks to a number of people without whom today literally would not have happened. First, thank you to Judge Thompson and to the rest of the court for hosting us and having us here today. Thank you as well to Robin Tabora, the clerk of the district court, and not incidentally, the judges, that is Judge Cabranes' first courtroom deputy. She and her staff, especially Maria Carpenter and Wanda Hawkins, have worked tirelessly, and I emphasize tirelessly in recent weeks, especially to make this event happen. Thank you as well to our hosts, that is to Yale Law School, and specifically to Dean Robert Post, Mike Thompson, Mark LaFontaine, Georgianne Rogers, and Jim Barnett. I want to thank also Janet Hansen, Judge Cabranes' ever competent and, as everyone who has encountered her knows, ever patient secretary. And thanks as well to Daniel Mark Duffy, about whom I will have some words later, but whose artistic talents are what bring us here today, and artistic talents you will see shortly. With that, let me turn the podium over to the first of our speakers and to our host, to my friend, the Dean and Saul and Lillian Goldman, Professor of Law here at Yale Law School, Robert Post.
It's my privilege today to welcome you all to this bar mitzvah that honors a distinguished alumnus, a scholar, a mentor, and a judge, José Cabranes. I want to welcome especially his family members, and in particular his wife, Kate Stith, who is, as you may know, the Lafayette S. Foster Professor of Law here at the Yale Law School and one of our most distinguished faculty members. We are extremely pleased to host this event in your honor, Judge Cabranes. This large and varied gathering is a testament, I think, to Judge Cabranes' influence across many different spheres of life. We are honored today to be with Chief Judge Alvin Thompson, himself a Yale Law School alumnus of the class of 1978, and with the other members of the District Court for the District of Connecticut, who are gathered here today in ceremonial session. We welcome Judge Cabranes' colleagues from the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit and from the many other state and federal courts that are represented here today. We also wish to welcome current and former members of the Yale Law faculty, the Yale administration and the Yale Corporation, and attorneys from Connecticut and the New York Bar, and the many, many others who are here today in this auditorium who have been touched in myriad ways by Judge Cabranes in the course of his long and magnificent career. I am also extremely pleased to welcome so many of Judge Cabranes' current and former law clerks. It is a fitting tribute indeed that the portrait we unveil today was commissioned by the generations of lawyers that he inspired. After today's ceremony, the lovely portrait that was painted by Daniel Mark Duffy will hang in our alumni reading room. Those of you who are familiar with the Yale Law School will know that this is perhaps the most hallowed space in the Yale Law School. It is reserved for our most admired and accomplished alumni. It includes 4 justices of the Supreme Court, 3 presidents, a number of deans, and many distinguished members of the Academy and Bar. These portraits watch over some of the most important events that happen at this school. We literally look up to the men and women who are on those walls. And as Lincoln might have said, it is altogether fitting and proper today that Judge Cabranes will be elevated to join them. Of course, those of us who know Judge Cabranes have been looking up to him for a very long time. It was almost 5 decades ago that he came into this building as a first-year law student. At that point in his life, he had already completed a remarkable journey. He was born in Mayaguez, Puerto Rico. His mother was a grammar school teacher, an editor, and later a civic activist for Puerto Ricans on the mainland. His father was also a teacher, and later the chief probation officer for the United States District Court in Puerto Rico, and the director of the Puerto Ricans Government Office in New York. In those early years, Judge Cabranes' parents forged the commitments that have guided Judge Cabranes' life ever since, to education and to scholarship, to family and community, to public service, and to justice. The Cabranes family moved to the South Bronx when José was 5 years old. He spoke no English, but he excelled in schools, graduating from the public schools of New York City, and then Columbia College, the Yale Law School, and Cambridge, where he earned a degree in international law. He practiced law in New York and earned a faculty appointment at Rutgers University. Along the way, he took time off to teach history at the Colegio San Ignacio in Puerto Rico, to co-found the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, and to serve as chairman of the board of Aspira of New York, an organization devoted to helping inner-city Hispanic youth prepare for college. He later served as the special counsel to the governor of Puerto Rico and head of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico's office in Washington, D.C. He has been a mentor to countless young people who share his heritage. One former research assistant said of Judge Cabranes, "José helped us to integrate the two parts of our identity to be comfortable in our skin." He has rightly been called a hero of the Hispanic community. In 1975, Judge Cabranes returned to New Haven when Yale President Kingman Brewster tapped him to become the very first general counsel of Yale University. And that was the beginning of a career in service to his alma mater that has included more than a decade as a trustee of the Yale Corporation. 4 years after that, another president came calling. Jimmy Carter named Judge Cabranes to a seat on the district court, making him the first Puerto Rican to serve as a federal judge on the mainland. One New York Times article characterized his tenure this way, I'm quoting now, "Prosecutors and defense lawyers alike describe him as intelligent and as fair. They also say that the judge, known to talk to Hispanic plaintiffs and defendants in Spanish, rules with compassion." After 15 years on the court, including 2 as the chief judge, President Clinton elevated Judge Cabranes to the Second Circuit. At the confirmation hearing for his new appointment, he earned praise from all sides of the political spectrum. Senator Orrin Hatch called him one of the premier judges in the country. Senator Joe Lieberman called him an extraordinary human being. And Senator Chris Dodd said he defies traditional, superficial ideological labelings. Asked if the nominee was a liberal or a conservative, Senator Dodd said, "I'd answer that by saying, José Cabranes is a judge." The spirit of that judicial independence and care has defined Judge Cabranes' 17 years on the Second Circuit. He has been called a judge's judge, and he has been lauded for his scholarly excellence. He has authored opinions on virtually every area of law and has made particular contributions in international law, criminal procedure, and sentencing, a subject that he has also addressed in his significant academic publications. As we dedicate this portrait today, we pay tribute to Judge Cabranes' lifelong devotion to the rule of law. His law school contemporary and friend, former Attorney General Michael Mukasey, put his finger on Judge Cabranes' unique role in our judiciary when he said, and I'm quoting, "He's not doctrinaire, he's somebody who applies the law as it is written." We at the Yale Law School welcome this portrait of Judge Cabranes today, not merely because of his outstanding achievements on the bench. We instead and also hold him up as a role model to our students because of his character and his integrity, because of his strength of mind and judgment, and because he has used these virtues to craft a shining example of a life well lived in the law. As my predecessor, Dean Harold Coe, put it, not for a second has Judge Cabranes forgotten where he came from or what his life's success has meant. Along the way, he has inspired the intense affection of generations of his law clerks, including many from this law school. I know of few judges who are loved so well by those who have reason to know them best. So now, when this portrait assumes its rightful place on our walls, generations of students to come will look up to Judge Cabranes, and they will be inspired to learn the story of his life. And it is my hope that in this way, his influence will extend for a long time to come.
Thank you, Robert. Our next speaker is also from Yale. Dorothy Robinson is the Vice President and General Counsel of Yale University, a position that she has held since 1986. She also shares something in common with all of us, that is, all of the judge's law clerks. The judge hired her, in this case as Assistant General Counsel in 1978. Please welcome Dorothy Robinson.
Thank you very much, José. Good afternoon. Judge Cabranes, family members, friends, and distinguished guests. It is a very great honor for me to be here to celebrate Judge Cabranes by the unveiling of his portrait and to have been asked to speak at this occasion. It brings back distinctive memories, as I well recall being in this room in December 1979 when the judge, then leaving his service as Yale University's first general counsel, was sworn in as district court judge. I'm here to offer a few words about the judge's years as general counsel at Yale and later his service as a trustee, or what we call a fellow of the Yale Corporation. I was hired by Judge Cabranes as a young attorney in those early years, as was my colleague Linda Lorimer, Vice President and Secretary of the University. I know that I will speak for both of us when I characterize Judge Cabranes as simply an extraordinary teacher and mentor, one whose influence on both of us was absolutely formative in our own careers and played no small part in our rising to the challenges of serving Yale University as vice presidents under President Rick Levin. We both are enormously grateful for that time of learning with someone so immensely talented, so keenly observant, and so willing to share with us insights that would remain useful and even gather strength through the decades. And we find ourselves using his phrases still. Judge Cabranes created and shaped the position of general counsel at Yale from the time of his arrival in 1975, when he was appointed to Yale's leadership team by President Kingman Brewster as the legal advisor, a title he fashioned after the position of the same title at the State Department. He was one of that bold first generation of general counsels at universities across the country who started the work of organizing how their institutions, each with its own character and style, would respond to the growing demands of expanded regulation and multiplying sources of liability without compromising the essential values and identity of an academic institution. He also performed the important work of government relations for Yale, maintaining a network of contacts to ensure appropriate communication on topics of institutional concern to national policymakers. As I thought about how I might capture for you in words a portrait of our honoree in those pioneering days of general counselhood, I read through some old files. And I noticed a memorandum that Judge Cabranes wrote in 1979 to President A. Bartlett Giamatti, advising the president on qualities to look for in his successor as Yale's general counsel. There is no way that I can offer a richer description of Judge Cabranes himself than to read you a portion of that memorandum with the author's permission. He wrote, and I quote, I quote, "I believe it is of the utmost importance that the position of general counsel be filled by a practicing lawyer. The person's experience should not, however, be limited solely to private practice. He or she ought to have had a good deal of vocational and avocational experience with the world of public policy, that is, government and politics. Experience in the not-for-profit sector, including education, may be valuable, but it is not essential. It is far more important that he or she be flexible and creative in the handling of people and bureaucracies, and be able to understand some of the irrationalities of the political processes." I say, who has a more natural instinct for the latter than Judge Cabranes? The memo continues, quote, "I believe the person in question ought to have a degree from Yale College or the law school. It is important that the general counsel have some sense for the lore and sociology of the place and not be at the mercy of those who do not have some command of those matters." My comment, the judge was such a master and guru of this lore and sociology that he made it possible for your speaker to become a successor, even while evading the requirement of a Yale College or a Yale Law degree. Continuing on, Judge Cabranes wrote, quote, "You should not be searching for an elder statesman, though of course the right person might well be a more senior attorney and might indeed be wise. The key thing is that the general counsel be fully capable of doing any of the work undertaken by his three subordinates, and that he or she actually toil with his subordinates in the completion of that work. I would bet that all those here who have worked for Judge Cabranes will attest that he always worked with us, dug into our memos, and invariably, through his relentless markups, caused every piece of work to be better." He continued, quote, "Law teaching experience may be useful and may suggest that the candidate will be at home in this environment, but this factor should be given little or no weight if the candidate is not an experienced practitioner of the law. I can think of no more dubious model than that of a law teacher, tenured or not, who has not had substantial experience as a mundane practicing lawyer, in the role of general counsel, that is. After all, this position was about legal advice and representation." And he concluded, quote, "Finally, I recommend that the general counsel have a sense of humor. He or she should be amused by the eccentricities and creative disorganization of our kind of institution and have a fondness for them." I dare say that this sentence captures perfectly Yale's first general counsel. Some 9 years after leaving Yale to join the judiciary, Judge Cabranes again was called to service at Yale. He was appointed by Yale President Benno Schmidt in 1987 to serve as a Yale trustee, otherwise known as a fellow of the corporation, and he continued as a fellow for 12 years. He has served on a great many other nonprofit boards, as Dean Post has alluded, and I know it must have been that other service that led to his commentary, both in speeches and publications, on how boards and trustees can do better in fulfilling the roles expected of them by exercising their proper governance roles with greater diligence, greater activism, and greater skepticism. He has done a great service to boards everywhere by calling this out, however painful the message may be to some. For all of these qualities, for all he has done for his institution, Yale University, and his Yale family, of which I am proud to be a member, I will use Judge Cabranes' own words, his own phrase, "He is indeed a great American."
Thank you, Dorothy. Glad I didn't use the Great American line myself. Our next speaker is Felix Lopez. Felix is a graduate of this law school who currently serves as Director of Legal Services at the Gay Men's Health Crisis. For present purposes, he is better identified as a former student of Judge Cabranes' and as Judge Cabranes' research assistant with someone else we might hear a word about and even from on the judge's book, 1979 book, Citizenship and the American Empire. Please welcome Felix Lopez.
Thank you and good afternoon. Since it's a bar mitzvah, I'm looking forward to the kishka. It's a Puerto Rican food, actually. It's a Puerto Rican delicacy. I was the judge's assistant many years ago, research assistant many years ago, along with someone else whom you will, of course, recognize. And we have a note from her that I'd like to read. It is, Dear José, it is not possible for me to travel to New Haven on the day of the unveiling of your portrait. It seems almost like yesterday that we first met. Yet the years have passed and much has happened to each of us. What has remained constant is our friendship. You have been my advisor and my mentor my entire professional life. My admiration and respect for you is boundless. Undoubtedly, during the unveiling of your portrait today, others will speak about your professional life, your scholarship, and your intellect. I am assuming someone will talk about your humor and wit. I hope someone will also talk about what an extraordinarily kind and decent man you are. My thoughts will be with you on your day of celebration. With warm regards, Sonia Sotomayor. I am the less distinguished of his two research assistants. I was in the class of 1977 and 1979 and 1991. I was 17L at the Yale Law School. And I got through only because of people like José. I was at dinner the other night with three law school classmates, Sonia Sotomayor, Drew Rice, and Rudy Aragon. We were joined by a writer who was helping Justice Sotomayor with a book about her experiences at Yale and elsewhere. The writer asked whether we had been comfortable at Yale and whether we had found Yale to be a welcoming place. The question was being asked, you understand, of four people, three of whom grew up in the projects, in the South Bronx, East Harlem, and the South Side of Chicago, and one of whom was from rural New Mexico. To boot, the four of us had grown up without fathers because of early death or wanderlust or alcohol. We also grew up poor with all the limitations and privations associated with poverty before the advent of the War on Poverty, when being poor often meant genuine hunger and want, the kind of hunger and want that is now not so common in America, but still abounds in much of the world. Three of us knew Spanish before we knew English. Two of us were Vietnam veterans, and one of us was a high school dropout and former juvenile delinquent. So were we comfortable at Yale, and did we find it welcoming? Of course not. But then we weren't ready to be comfortable at Yale. At least some of us weren't ready to be comfortable or to accept its welcome. Indeed, as John McCarthy, another classmate, once remarked, most of us walked around in a state of low dread that first year. Nothing so dramatic as to require clinical intervention, but comfortable? No, not very. I, for one, used to think of the principal corridor that runs through the middle of the law school building as something like the dark and moist gullet of some gigantic prehistoric creature, something the size of the biblical fish, perhaps. Once past the entrance to the law school, I felt drawn along by irresistible peristaltic forces, the dread increasing exponentially the farther I traveled down the corridor. I imagined that I was being drawn to some awful fate. Sonia, Drew, and Rudy probably felt something less dramatic than that, but still, they weren't comfortable either. Her first question having been answered, Sonia's writer friend then asked, Did anyone make you feel welcome at Yale? The answer quickly was José. José Cabranes made us feel welcome. At the end of a corridor that I imagined to be lined with sharp teeth, I found, just as Sonia found, and others too, then Professor Cabranes, a man with a ready smile, a capacious heart, and an open hand. This was entirely unexpected, especially as we anticipated something else and did not then know very much about the Yale Law School. Gerald Torres, another classmate, used to say that we were ill at ease because we were lacking blueprints. Gerald claimed that folks like the wonderful and brilliant Seth Waxman or the really, really smart Martha Minow had arrived at Yale with blueprints to help them negotiate that dreadful corridor, as well as all the other things that made up life at the Yale Law School. We were without blueprints, said Gerald, hence low dread, constant low dread. Professor Cabranes changed all that, of course. Instead of sharp teeth or indifference, he offered acceptance and encouragement and friendship, and he became a guide for us, a padrino, if you will, an intellectual guide, a practical guide, a cultural guide, a professional guide, a social guide. He made Yale accessible. He made it safe. He made it comfortable. What was once unintelligible and apt to excite dysphoria became something that made sense, something that could be managed, that could be taken in, assimilated, made our own. He did this with good humor, charm, loyalty, and kindness. He took us into his confidence, and by extension, he took us into the school's confidence. In effect, he gave us blueprints. We owe much to his kindness, and kindness is no small thing, nor is it as common as we would like to believe. To be sure, our religions encourage it, our value systems promote it, and all of us believe at bottom that we practice it assiduously and with great skill. I try to practice kindness every day. Sometimes I can even sustain it for several minutes at a time. I can go 8, 9, even 10 minutes thinking kind thoughts and not wishing my neighbor ill or hoping that the axle will fall off the Lexus that just cut me off on I-95. I practice kindness the way the old 60s poster suggested that many of us practice love. The poster said, "I love humanity. It's people I can't stand." Not so with Judge Cabranes. He practices kindness consistently, tenaciously, even precognitively. This is to say that it is deeply embedded in him. You might say that kindness is a reflex with him. It was through his kindness that a group of students with no experience that might prepare them for Yale came to feel part of the community that is the Yale Law School. And he is as kind today as he was back then, always ready to support, to encourage, to mentor. And today, when I am at my very best, when I'm helping a law student make a choice or negotiate a path, I am following his lead and generous example. For that and so much more, I say thank you, Judge Cabranes, and congratulations to you on this lovely honor. And thank you to the rest of you for being here today to honor this very fine man.
Thank you, Felix. Our next speaker is Mark Gottridge, who is currently co-head of the Global Financial Services Litigation Practice at Hogan Lovells in New York. Most important for today's purposes, Mark was not just one of Judge Cabranes' first law clerks, he was Judge Cabranes' very first law clerk. I gather he labored in that role for 4 months on his own. He not only helped the judge get things rolling, but he did something that few other law clerks in history can claim to have done, and in the bar mitzvah theme, few have the chutzpah to do, which is introduce Judge Cabranes to his current wife, Professor Stith. So, without further ado, Mark, you're over there. Mark Gottridge.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I appreciate that. It is really my distinct privilege today to share with you a few reflections on Judge Cabranes' extraordinary service on the bench of this court, the District of Connecticut, as district judge and as chief judge. It is really only fitting that his portrait should be presented at a special ceremonial session of the District Court for the District of Connecticut, which is a court that Judge Cabranes graced for nearly 15 years. And it is also fitting that we meet today, as Dorothy reminded us, in the very same auditorium where on a chilly December day in 1979, which many of us remember, Judge Cabranes was sworn in. And I remember very much reading with interest the New York Times that morning on the train up from Grand Central Station. The Times featured the new judge as the, quote, man in the news. I think that was before they had women in the news or people in the news. And readers of the Times, which our honoree might say is the putative newspaper of record in this country, the readers of the Times would have learned a great deal about the new judge from that article. He was the first native of Puerto Rico appointed to the federal bench in the continental United States. You would have learned from the Times that he would be turning 39 the next day, that he had a brilliant academic record and had for many years ably served the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico and, of course, Yale University. But many in that day, in that auditorium, this auditorium that day, surely wondered what kind of judge would Judge Cabranes be. The Times, always helpful, gave us a hint. They quoted President Giamatti of this university, predicting that Yale's loss would be, quote, a great gain for the federal judiciary, close quote. And the fullness of time, if I may appropriate a Cabranesism, would show that, yes, President Giamatti was exactly right. So what was it that made Judge Cabranes such an exceptional district judge? His intellect, of course, as well as his extraordinary energy and work ethic. I really picked up on the point as a law clerk that Dorothy made of Judge Cabranes being there, working late at night, over the weekends, side by side with the law clerks, crafting decisions, reading the cases, talking about what the cases said and how they applied to the case at hand. Judge Cabranes also administered his docket efficiently, ensuring that lawyers moved their cases along. And he kept them on their toes in the courtroom as well, with cogent questions, always fair, but also very tough at times. Judge Cabranes delivered his decisions promptly, but without sacrificing in any way the quality of the judging. To the surprise of some Connecticut lawyers, at least in the early days, soon after a motion had been argued before Judge Cabranes, the judge would, after a recess, where appropriate, come back out on the bench and dictate into the record a thorough, carefully reasoned, and well-supported ruling, complete with case citations. Judge Cabranes was always alert for the lawyer or the litigant who was trying to pull one over on him. Perhaps that's his New York City upbringing. The most extreme example that I've heard of this is that of a Colombian drug dealer, criminal defendant in Judge Cabranes' court, who attempted to convince the judge at a hearing that the crop he was growing was actually strawberries. To which the judge remarked, "Who do I look like, Juan Valdez?" Now, there is not time today to discuss many of Judge Cabranes' decisions rendered as a member of this court, but I would like to mention a couple that I think exemplify the meticulous approach of Judge Cabranes. In Republican Party of the State of Connecticut against Tashjian, Judge Cabranes held that the state's closed primary law, which prohibited a political party from allowing unaffiliated voters to participate in its primary elections, infringed the party members' First Amendment right of association. That ruling was ultimately affirmed by the United States Supreme Court. In United States against Tornero, Judge Cabranes addressed several novel issues relating to the insanity defense, ultimately excluding evidence of the defendant's compulsive gambling. The Court of Appeals affirmed. I should also mention the many complex cases arising out of the colonial realty fraud, a massive Ponzi scheme whose principals sold real estate investment interests, limited partnership interest, to thousands of investors. Colonial's collapse inflicted tremendous losses on the investors and scarred communities across this state. Hundreds of cases were filed, dozens of securities class actions, sprawling bankruptcy proceedings, and closely watched criminal cases. For years, Judge Cabranes ruled firmly and fairly in all of these matters, and his rulings were repeatedly affirmed on appeal. Judge Cabranes also excelled at the most difficult task that a district judge must face, sentencing. And he did this both before and after the introduction of what were then mandatory federal sentencing guidelines. In a scholarly book, which was co-authored with Professor Kate Stith Cabranes, as well as in speeches and articles, Judge Cabranes made a powerful case against the bureaucratic guidelines regime. But his actions as a sentencing judge spoke at least as forcefully as his words. Judge Cabranes' sentencing of defendants, even after the adoption of the guidelines and their dreaded grid, combined compassion and rigor and reflected the judge's deep understanding of the purposes of sentencing, as well as the particular circumstances of the defendant and the interests of society and the victims in each individual case. Judge Cabranes was well known throughout this district for treating litigants and lawyers with great respect and patience, conducting his court with great decorum. He afforded litigants and lawyers an opportunity to make a record, as he would say, before rendering his decisions. And he was almost always ready immediately to rule on that record based on what had come out in front of the judge. The only exception of which I am aware involved a prospective juror in Hartford one day who came up to the sidebar to ask the judge, out of the presence of the others, or out of the hearing of the others, to be excused from service on the jury. Because this prospective juror started his explanation too loudly, Judge Cabranes waved at him as a signal to keep his voice down so the others wouldn't hear. The prospective juror immediately dropped down to his knees, made the sign of the cross, and intoned, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." All the judge could do was to declare a recess. I have that on unimpeachable authority, that story. On a more serious note, those of us who had the great fortune to have been law clerks for Judge Cabranes received an amazing education, not merely in federal procedure and jurisprudence, but in all the many subjects in which Judge Cabranes is so well versed, ranging from U.S. foreign policy to the history of the New Deal, to the intricacies of politics in New York City, Puerto Rico, and many, many other jurisdictions besides. He was, to pick up on a point that Dorothy made, the best editor that any one of us ever had or ever will have. We learned a lot from him in chambers. But more importantly, we gained a great friend and mentor for life, somebody who inspires in us boundless affection and admiration, and we are proud to join all of you today in honoring Judge Cabranes.
Thank you, Mark. We're now entering the Article 3 portion of our proceedings. Our next speaker requires little introduction in this setting, and in fact, he asked me not to introduce him, but I will anyway. He has a long record of distinguished service to this district and to our country as a whole, serving as, among many other things, United States Attorney for the District of Connecticut, United States District Judge for the District of Connecticut, and as a United States Circuit Judge on the Second Circuit since 1979, and as its Chief Judge from 1993 to 1997. Please welcome Judge John Newman.
May it please the court, Chief Judge Thompson, distinguished members of my former court, Judge Cabranes, Kate, and friends all. It's a great pleasure to be here and to celebrate this marvelous occasion where we honor not only one of the great judges of our court, but truly one of the great judges of the United States. Much has been already said to demonstrate what a truly outstanding judge he is, and it's even possible that the next speaker will also cover a bit of that ground. I can't count on that, but it is a distinct possibility. So I see no reason to gild the lily further. I've already said he's one of the greats of the nations, and I think that covers it all. I prefer to discuss another aspect of his career that perhaps has escaped your attention. It is the varieties of his heritage. It has been widely said that he is of Puerto Rican heritage. And I have no reason to doubt that, although I have not seen the birth certificate. But accepting that fact, as I do, and honor him for it, my point is that that's not his only heritage. There are other strands to the heritage of this distinguished fellow. One may surprise you. It is the strand of Connecticut Yankee. I suspect you didn't know that. But if you examine the brilliant account of the history of the District of Connecticut that he authored some years ago, you will see evidence. He not only surveyed the history of this district in the late 1790s, but he delighted in dwelling on the name of the second judge of the District of Connecticut, Judge Pierpont Edwards. You don't get more Connecticut Yankee than Pierpont Edwards. He then went on to discuss a case that was handled in the early days, brought by a plaintiff whose name was Jedithan Cobb. This is all out of Judge Cabranes' lecture, Jedithan Cobb. So he delights in recounting Connecticut Yankee history. He's very good at it. Now there's another strain, perhaps a little better known to you. It's the New York strain. I don't mean just that he spent many years in Queens and was active in New York political and civic affairs. I mean the extent to which he brings New York lore into his opinions. I give you an example. Taking a fairly obscure case that came to our court from the National Labor Relations Board, the judge wrote, "Our subject is labor relations at Katz's Delicatessen, a landmark rough and ready eating establishment on the northern precincts of Fable Lower East Side. It is a legendary site of pilgrimage by, among others, domestic political campaigners and foreign visitors in search of photo opportunities, placing them in a New York setting authenticated by the proximity to hot pastrami and stuffed derma." He went on, "Katz's has earned a reputation for its contribution to the national defense, having advertised its takeout menu with the immortal rhyme, 'Send a salami to your boy in the Army.'" And he continued with the fact that Katz's Delicatessen was visited by Vice President Gore and Premier Chemerenden, and he quoted the owner as saying, "We'll treat them rudely like we treat everyone else. It's part of the New York ethos." Who but a New Yorker would write lines like that? Another case that caught my attention illustrating this point is one that began, this is his opinion, "The question presented in this case concerns a rarely celebrated but instantly recognizable feature of everyday life in New York City, subway breaks. 24 hours a day and 365 days a year, the city's subway cars safely stop at 468 passenger stations, and as any strap hanger knows, many times in between, depositing riders of all classes and descriptions in homes, workplaces, ballparks, and every other destination imaginable. The subway is an indelible feature of the city's culture. Its legend and lore fascinate locals and visitors alike. And he goes on to recount how subways are celebrated in literature and musical comedy, even quoting the well-known lines from the Leonard Bernstein show, "The Bronx is up, the Battery's down, and the people ride in a hole in the ground." Who but a New Yorker would inject those delicious remarks into the Federal Reporter? Now, there's another strain. It has been alluded to today, but not illustrated. And that is a strain of his heritage. That is the Jewish strain, or perhaps the Yiddish strain. Encountering a case that tickled his fancy, he decided to craft an eloquent footnote explaining that this case was an example of chutzpah. And he wrote in this footnote, "Chutzpah is a legal term of art." You didn't know that. Is a legal term of art, analytically similar to unclean hands, but being the careful scholar that he is, adding, though not necessarily coterminous with that concept as understood in Chancery. He then illustrated the point. First, he mentioned actually a case of mine in which a former New York State senator, while serving a sentence for selling stolen bonds to the Second New Haven Bank here in New Haven, sued the bank for negligence, contending that if the teller had checked the day's list of stolen bonds that day, the bonds would not have been accepted and he would not have been convicted. Judge Cabranes continues with his exegesis on the word, mentioning the case of an individual, quoting, "an individual who, after being mauled by the 450-pound Siberian tiger he had been raising inside his fifth-floor apartment, sued the city and the police who entered the apartment to save the animal for doing so without a warrant." So this is a man of broad heritage, covers many bases. Indeed, I think it's fair to say he is a man of universal heritage. And not only do these frivolous examples that I've called to your attention illustrate that, but his career and his writings, both in the scholarly academic world and in his opinions, illustrate that too. He has taught and written widely on international law and international human rights. He is rightly regarded as a scholar in those fields. So, Jose, it's totally fitting that generations of Yale Law students will see this painting in the reading room, the alumni room of the Yale Law School, where you will gaze down on them and they will take justifiable inspiration from you. I congratulate you on this wonderful event.
Thank you, Judge Newman. Next up is another judge who also requires little introduction, especially in these halls where he has served as a member of the faculty for almost half a century. He has also served our country with great distinction as a circuit judge on the Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit since 1981, and as its chief judge from 1997 to 2000, as the chair of the Executive Committee of the Judicial Conference, and as a member of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act Court of Appeals, I think a court that has somehow managed to issue only 2 opinions in its entire existence, but that's okay. The latter two by appointment of the Chief Justice of the United States. Please welcome the Honorable Ralph Winter.
May it please the court. I've been dying to say that all afternoon. It's the first time in 30 years, and it's the first time I've ever said it to judges who were my students. And I like to think it's the first time they felt unthreatened in my presence. This will be a unique speech today. There will be no Yiddish, be entirely in English, and I want to say it's a pleasure to be here, although it's somehow the fulfillment of a duty to a friend of almost 50 years. when I heard that there was a court meeting to hang José Cabranes, I thought I'd better be there. The vote may be close. I've not seen the subject of my speech was going to be José Cabranes, the dark side. I mentioned that to him, and he immediately reminded me that he got to speak last. So today I have a different topic. I've not seen the portrait, but it surely, I'm sure, captures this brilliant and influential man of character and perception. Not only a scholar, lawyer, and jurist, but also a mentor, a narrator, commentator, entertainer, father, and husband. Still, on the portrait, part of him will be missing. What would a complete portrait of José Cabranes look like? JAC, as he's known on the court, is a fountain, a veritable cornucopia of communications. A complete portrait would be a portrait of constant action. It would portray him sitting at his desk, a phone on his shoulder, necessary equipment, while conversing with an unidentified listener. On his knee would be a cell phone to be put to use if the landline went on hold or died. At the same time, he would be typing away in his computer, exchanging emails with several others, while simultaneously lecturing law clerks. Scattered on his desk would be a variety of items, perhaps Edmund Burke's Reflections on the French Revolution, Michael Barone's Almanac of American Politics, and the latest New York Post column by Cindy Adams. There would also be an American flag. The topics covered among this multitude of communications would vary. They would certainly include tips to Amy on work in California, comments to Jennifer on her latest column, conversations about the Yankees with Alejo and Ben, or he might even talk with a colleague about sporting events involving the boys. I have it on good authority that his interest in sports is recently acquired, largely because of the boys' interest. I have this from a good source, known in my chambers as JAC Jr., who has quoted Judge Cabranes as saying, "The Cabraneses exercise their mind, not their body." Non-topics of these communications might emanate from the truly incredible breadth of JAC's recreational reading. They might include dissertations on instructive but often forgotten episodes of American history, including events in World War II, the Cold War, political appointments, at which JAC is both knowledgeable and adept, on various ongoing controversies. I can testify firsthand that these might even include the New York City mayoralty of one Vincent Impellitteri, not a household topic of conversation at dinner time. JAC would bring to these subjects not only a detailed knowledge of facts, but also very pragmatic, non-doctrinaire, independent, and iconoclastic analysis. He might, for example, question whether some modern views of what is recognized as international law have little foundation other than statements made by the legal professoriate, by members of the legal professoriate at some recent conference. Or he might express mild skepticism about the governance of American universities. His analysis would also reflect an unabashed and unashamed patriotism. For his example, in his bemoaning of educational measures designed, in his view, to negate a belief and American exceptionalism. In the background of this portrait would be a number of figures, almost all with expressions of unqualified admiration and gratitude. Former law clerks would reflect with admiration on the education they received from their year in his service, as we've heard today. Colleagues would be grateful for well-considered advice and a very warm friendship. But there would also be a couple of isolated, shadowy individuals with expressions ranging from quizzical to worry. An emeritus professor from Columbia might gaze at the scene darkly and think, I have been worried about this since his article in the Columbia paper expressing a slightly negative view of Eleanor Roosevelt. A law professor would wonder how some of these views could have been formed given that the professor had taught JAC everything that the professor knew. The final figure would be a university administrator wondering what transparency means. Actual portraits cannot ever capture the complete person, but I have no doubt that this portrait will honor this man of character and perception. And about that, I can say only, it's about time.
Well, we are now ready for the reason you've actually come here, which is to unveil the portrait and to see how well it does capture the man. And then the bar mitzvah boy himself gets to speak. Before we reveal the portrait, I just want to offer my profoundest thanks on behalf of all the clerks to the portrait's creator, the extraordinarily talented Daniel Mark Duffy. Daniel's biography is on the back of your program, so I won't belabor his many accomplishments. I also think he might get some grief if I did from his daughter, who is here with him today. What I will tell you is that Judge Cabranes' portrait will quite remarkably be Daniel's 8th to grace the halls of the Yale Law School. And when you see his masterpiece in a moment, I think you will understand why he has received so many commissions from here and elsewhere. As you will see, although Judge Winter is correct and a portrait cannot capture everything about a man, I respectfully submit that the portrait you will see captures Judge Cabranes perfectly. Not only his likeness, but even more important, his unique combination of humor on the one hand and a word that he likes, gravitas, on the other. In addition, through the background, you'll see in a moment, Daniel managed to convey a sense of who Judge Cabranes is and what is most important to him. You'll see an architectural feature of the courthouse here in New Haven, which Judge Cabranes holds so dear and played such a large role in restoring. You'll see a view of Yale's campus, the view of Yale's campus that you can see from the judge's chambers here in New Haven. And you'll see photos, subtle, so they don't distract from the judge himself, yet distinct, of the judge's family and of a scene in his native Puerto Rico. Having built up the suspense, or given away the store, depending on your perspective, I'd like to invite Daniel, the artist, up here, along with Judge Cabranes himself and the judge's family, to join me here. And the judge's daughter, Jennifer, and his son, Alejo, will do the honors of actually unveiling the portrait. And after that, Judge Cabranes will say a few words.
We'll get a better view when we leave.
Everyone has stepped on my lines about the bar mitzvah. I did not have a bar mitzvah. I was not eligible. But I did spend my formative years in the Bronx and in deepest Queens, largely among Jews. So, finally, I've gotten my own bar mitzvah. Secular to be sure, but who am I to complain? Ceremonies marking the presentation of a portrait in universities as in courtrooms tend to elicit some old chestnuts, insights by notables. In academic circles, the quotable insights are preferably those of Dr. Samuel Johnson. It was Dr. Johnson who remarked on the apparent discrepancy between an epitaph carved on a certain gentleman's tombstone and the manner in which the gentleman had actually conducted his life. Quote, in lapidary inscriptions, Dr. Johnson famously observed, "A man is not under oath." The same is true of ceremonies like this, in which the speakers are most certainly not under oath. Dr. Johnson has his uses, but a more modest authority gives us the more pertinent insight. I refer to the Hall of Fame catcher Yogi Berra. On the occasion of a tribute early in his major league career in his hometown of St. Louis, which is Kate's hometown as well, Yogi began, as I do today, with this thought: I want to thank everyone who made this day necessary. This is my turn for thanks. If not now, when? For making this event possible, my thanks go, first of all, to Chief Judge Thompson and to my other friends and colleagues on the federal bench of Connecticut, and of course to our host, Robert Post, the great dean of this great law school, whose generous hospitality we enjoyed today. And thanks also to one of Dean Thompson's associate deans, Mike Thompson, who quietly and effectively keeps the engines of this complicated law school running. I owe special thanks today, as always, to my law clerks over a span of 32 years who occupy the left wing of this space. Especially some who will remain unidentified. In the District of Connecticut, portraits are usually reserved for the time when a judge assumes senior status. When it became clear some years ago that I had no intention of taking senior status in the foreseeable future, my clerks took the matter into their own hands, as it were. I am, as always, in their debt. A word on my law clerks. In the nature of things, the work in chambers with law clerks is intense and intimate. My collaboration with my clerks and their later progress in the legal profession has been a source of immeasurable satisfaction. I am especially pleased that Mark Gottridge and José Furman have played leading roles in this conspiracy of clerks. As it happens, both have a special place in my affection. Mark Gottridge, as you've heard, was my very first law clerk, and he brought to my first year on the bench an energetic New York style by way of Columbia College and the Harvard Law School, a style that matched the somewhat manic style of a New York Puerto Rican. Mark worked alongside a more deliberate fellow named Bob Shotney, who arrived a few months into the year and who helped keep Mark and me in line. We all tended to work with dispatch, and we put in long hours. The local federal bar was reported to be unsettled by the introduction of case management pretrial orders, not to speak of court sessions running past 9 p.m., for which I continue to owe an apology to my friend and former court reporter, Paul Collard, who is here today. I had not yet fully appreciated the kind of strain under which any court reporter necessarily works. Working a full day until 9 o'clock is a very long day for a court reporter, let me assure you. He tolerated me, and I'm very grateful for that. 3 decades after I horrified the local bar, at least for a while, I'm finally ready to give Mark up and to reveal him as the original co-conspirator in my overbearing style. But as you know, there's a reason why I can forgive Mark anything, including the fear that may still be associated in some places by the name of Judge Cabranes. For it was he who contrived with great subtlety to have me meet Kate Stith. She was then his fellow assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, and she had received an offer to teach at the Yale Law School. As Mark put it, this intrepid crime fighter needed some advice on the challenges of living in New Haven. Well, I did give Kate some advice on the subject of living in New Haven. And I'm forever grateful to Mark Gottridge. Jesse, too, is special to me in many ways. He came to my attention as a possible future clerk when he was merely a sophomore at Harvard College. I take the search for law clerks very seriously. And I begin early. I had read with amazement and appreciation a long article in the New Republic on the now forgotten political conspiracy theory known as the October surprise of the 1980 election. The reason you may not know much about the alleged October surprise of 1980 is that the investigative work of Jesse and his co-author for the New Republic proved it to be a political myth, if not a fraud. I first met Jesse in 1992 at the Harvard commencement, where his brother Jason and my daughter Amy were graduating from Harvard College. I aggressively pumped his hand and expressed my admiration for his great article. I believe I may actually have encouraged him then and there at his brother's college graduation to go to law school, with the ulterior motive, or at least the hope, that he could clerk for me afterward. As I said, I do take the search for law clerks very seriously. The rest is history. Jesse did go on to Yale Law School, and in an intrajudicial conspiracy, he clerked first for Judge Michael Mukasey in New York, where he observed at close hand a truly great federal trial judge at work. I know that his experience in Judge Mukasey's chambers will continue to inspire Jesse's service to our country. Jesse Furman is special to me in another way. As in the case of Bob Shotney, whose wife Stacy clerked for me the year after Bob, I was fortunate that Jesse's wife, Ariella Dubler, now a distinguished professor of law at Columbia, came to clerk for me the year after Jesse. The Savin Shotneys and the Dubler Furmans are doubly special to me. The central figure in our ceremony today is the artist Daniel Mark Duffy, to whom you've just been introduced, to whose work you've been introduced. Several distinguished emeritus faculty members of the Yale Law School have been painted by Dan Duffy, including some of my favorite teachers, and their portraits grace many walls in this building. So it's especially gratifying to be a part of Dan Duffy's Yale portfolio. I confess to you that in approaching this project, I did not have the courage of the Lord Protector, Oliver Cromwell, who famously rejected flattery by instructing the painter Peter Lely to paint him warts and all. Cromwell is no favorite of mine. On Cromwell, I hasten to say, I stand with the Irish Catholics, whose ancestors he crushed without mercy and who understandably despise his memory. In the matter of portraits, the Lord Protector is not my guide. I don't want it warts and all. Now, it would be passing strange to suggest an alternative course to an honest artist. How exactly do you tell an artist that you don't want warts and all? I think Kate was of help here, as always. At lunch with Dan Duffy, she jokingly recalled the finger-wagging admonition of our former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, when she first met her projected portraitist, what Kate calls Madeleine Albright's 20/20 solution. Lose 20 years and 20 pounds. My hunch is that Kate's jesting comments on the 20/20 solution were embedded in Dan's subconscious as he worked on this project. In any event, I'm grateful to Dan for a portrait that, as you'll see, also captures some relevant Yale architectural landmarks that can be observed from the windows of my 12th floor chambers, most especially the Yale Law School itself, and that includes subtle allusions to items in my office that are of special significance to our family, including pictures of one or another of them. This is the time for me to thank also my two families, the one defined by blood and the one defined by democratic politics. The first is the family headed by my wife, Kate Stith, Lafayette S. Forster Professor of Law at Yale, who has made possible anything good that has happened to me since we met in 1983, and whose can-do Midwestern temperament is matched by her intelligence and her consideration for others. This family includes also my children Jennifer, Amy, Alejo, and Ben, and Jennifer's husband, my son-in-law Roberto Braceras, who's also a graduate of the Yale Law School, and their 4 children. I want to thank also my court family, the official family I gained by virtue of my appointments to the federal judiciary. This family includes friends of many years, including notably the clerk of the district court, Robin Tabora, who long ago served in my district court chambers as courtroom deputy for nearly 15 years. I thank also Robin's colleagues in the clerk's office, including Maria Carpenter and Wanda Hawkins, who were responsible for organizing this event. After serving as my courtroom deputy, Robin went on to positions of increasing responsibility in the federal court system here and in Washington. Happily, she was repatriated to Connecticut by the judges of the district court several years ago to serve as clerk of court. In recalling my years on the district court, I want to record my thanks also to 2 other indispensable members of our court team. My assistant for over 20 years at Yale in the district court and for some years in the Court of Appeals, Lillian Olejarsik, the wonderful Mrs. O, who is here with us today. And to one of the truly accomplished official court reporters in the land, the incomparable Paul Collard. Paul, I know, misses those 9 p.m. sessions of court. And I cannot overstate the special debt of gratitude that I owe to my judicial assistant throughout my Court of Appeals years, Janet Hansen, a wizard of office management and a woman of extraordinary intelligence, competence, patience, and discretion. It was an honor to serve on this district court. It is the first federal trial court established by the new American Republic following adoption of the Constitution. As you have read on our program and heard from others today, it was in this very location at another ceremonial session of the district court that I took the oath of office in 1979 from my patron, Abraham Ribicoff. Senator Ribicoff had a role in the appointment of every federal judge appointed in Connecticut between 1963 and 1981, including some who sit on the district court bench today. In my case, as in that of some others, Senator Ribicoff's recommendation to the president was a result of the sympathetic interest of the judge whose seat on the district court I was called to occupy, John O. Newman. From the day in 1979 that John Newman and I discussed the possibility of my becoming a district judge, he has been a mentor, an inspiration, and an exemplar of public service. Another mentor and model, ever so different from John Newman in personality and in political origins, but equally my good friend and confidant, is Ralph Winter, who came to the Court of Appeals a couple of years after I had begun my service in the district court. I was privileged to be on the bench when he was sworn in at this very spot by Justice Thurgood Marshall. Ralph had been Marshall's first law clerk and favorite law clerk. I had known Ralph only slightly in my student years at Yale Law School. He was then a junior member of the faculty, and I observed him provide a raucous, even rollicking commentary on national affairs from his headquarters in the student lounge, what then we call the Coke Room. My clerks told me that I'd have to explain that that was a reference to Coca-Cola. I encountered Ralph again in different circumstances when I became Yale's general counsel. He would call me from time to complain that some unpopular voices in one or another place on campus were being intimidated or silenced by elements of our local thought police. I am pleased to think that whatever complaints Ralph may have had about earlier times at Yale, on my watch, his complaints were always resolved to his complete satisfaction, which is to say, in defense of freedom of expression. Ralph Winter and John Newman are among our country's greatest judges. This is an overused expression among judges, but of these two, there can be no doubt. They are among our country's greatest judges. I am honored by their friendship and humbled by their example. My induction here on a cold day in 1979, and people refer to it as a cold day because indeed it was very cold, and despite our efforts, I mean, Senator Rubikoff commented on it and was shocked that we had taken such extraordinary measures in the aftermath of OPEC's strike, as it were. And he thought that this was sort of a blow against OPEC of some kind. But everyone was shivering here. Aside from that, and having nothing to do with that, it was perfectly managed by the Associate General Counsel, Linda Koch Lorimer, who thereafter proceeded to have a luminous career in university administration as president of Randolph-Macon Women's College in Virginia, and more recently as vice president and secretary of Yale University. And it's a source of special pride to me that she's here with us today. Also present on that occasion, 30-plus years ago, as you heard, was another Associate General Counsel, Dorothy K. Robinson, who would in time succeed me as General Counsel of the university and would lend distinction to that position for more than a quarter of a century. Having hired Linda Lorimer and Dorothy Robinson as my deputies remains to this day my claim to fame at Yale and a source of personal satisfaction. Now, Felix Lopez, whom you've heard today, he is a special friend and a former student. He's an alumnus of the streets of Spanish Harlem. He's a dropout of the famously tough Machine and Metal Trades High School. I used to refer to him when I introduced him to people as a graduate of the Machine and Metal Trades High School before I started to get myself worked up about the rest of his life. He pulled me aside once and he said, actually, Jose, I dropped out of the Machine and Metal Trades High School. In any event, having dropped out of the Machine and Metal Trades High School, Felix went into the U.S. Army and to war in Vietnam, where he discovered an aptitude for East Asian languages that enabled him to resume his education at the University of Michigan, followed by the Yale Law School. Felix and his Yale Law School classmate, Sonia Sotomayor, joined me in trying to fill an important gap in the historiography of our island homeland. Between college and law school, I had taught history in San Juan, and I remained an amateur historian of Puerto Rico. I had been struck by the fact that there was no serious scholarship that explained exactly how and why the Puerto Ricans had been collectively naturalized by act of Congress in 1917. Felix and Sonia were my partners in reconstructing that legislation which was, in my view, the turning point in the history of our people. This was a voyage of discovery for the three of us, and a voyage that was made all the better by Felix's worldliness, his wit, and his love of learning. He is still recommending books to me 30 years later, and for which I'm always grateful. Mentioned in passing, he's been reading Herodotus recently. I know that Professor Kagan will be pleased to know that. I owe more than I can say to Yale and to its law school. I was admitted to Yale Law School in 1961, in the years well before the Revolution. In cultural terms, the early 60s were still the 50s. Arrival here was a turning point in my life. I had been the beneficiary of the Western Civilization core curriculum of Columbia College, but I was still the somewhat parochial son of a Spanish-speaking household from an island colony and a product of the public schools of New York City's outer boroughs. Yale Law School opened to me vistas that were simply unimaginable before. To paraphrase President Kennedy at the 1961 Yale commencement, I had the best of all possible worlds, a Columbia College education and a Yale degree. Yale Law School made possible my return to New Haven a decade after graduation as the university's legal counsel, which in turn led me to the federal bench, and so I shall always be in her debt. I owed my original appointment at Yale in 1975 to the late Kingman Brewster, one of Yale's great presidents and its greatest modernizer. In a time of transition at the university, I was honored to serve three great figures in American higher education, to each of whom I record my indebtedness. Kingman Brewster, Hannah Holborn Gray, who later served as president of the University of Chicago, and A. Bartlett Giamatti. Their confidence enabled me to start an office of administration that was entirely new at Yale, as it was new elsewhere, an in-house law office overseeing the vast and fascinating legal problems facing a modern university. After the presidential search of 1977, which passed over my great friend Hannah Gray and led to the appointment of Bart Giamatti, I expected to move to Washington to serve in government. I liked Giamatti very much. I particularly appreciated his sense of humor in private, which included an encyclopedic command of ethnic humor and politics. But I had no idea what he thought of me, and I understood full well that a new president might wish to have a new general counsel. One day, President-designate Giamatti invited me to lunch and a long walk. We were on the New Haven Green when Giamatti said to me, in an apparent aside, "I've considered the matter, and I want you to be my big chicharrone." I had never heard the phrase big chicharrone, but I immediately grasped the concept. This was 1978, not long after Watergate, so the phrase was immediately recognizable to me as a Puerto Rican version of big enchilada. Some of you who are old enough to remember that, to have lived through this period, will know that on the Nixon White House tapes, Nixon's aide, John Ehrlichman, had famously referred to Attorney General John Mitchell as the big enchilada. Now, although the phrase big chicharrone was new to me, I was flattered by Bart's apparent command of the Puerto Rican subculture. After all, the new president of Yale was deploying Puerto Rican slang and asking me to be his big chicharrone. Now, in Puerto Rico, a chicharrón is a deep-fried pork rind. In my mind, this must be the Puerto Rican equivalent of the big enchilada. And now this great man, this distinguished scholar of Renaissance literature and young and dynamic future president of Yale was asking me to be, well, he was asking me to be his deep-fried pork rind. This was utterly amazing to me. I began to compliment Bart on his command of Puerto Rican slang when he interrupted me to explain that he had been speaking Italian, not Spanish, and that chicharrone, as in Cicero, is Italian for guide or advisor. As in Dante, as he told me, as in Dante, with his teeth kind of bared, explaining to me, as in Dante's Divine Comedy, he told me, where Virgil is the author's chicharrone through the realms of the afterlife. My Columbia College education enabled me to understand what he was saying, more or less. So, my friends, for this one and only time, my name was associated with those of Dante Alighieri and Virgil. I was once a chicharrone to a president of Yale, which pretty much explains how I came to the federal judiciary, why in 1979 my induction ceremony was held here, and why in 2011 we are gathered here anew. I want to thank you all for the honor of your presence.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. Madam Clerk, would you please adjourn the ceremonial session?
All rise. The Honorable United States District Court for the District of Connecticut now stands adjourned.